There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Should I say Merry Christmas? Why not? It's not going to kill me. Merry Christmas. This will go up on Christmas Eve, Tokyo time. I don't think any of you are going to watch it because you're going to be doing Christmas Eve stuff. You know, you're going to be planting yourself under the mistletoe waiting for something to happen. Good luck with that. Vlog it. I guess this is the last day of Vlogmas, or is tomorrow the last day of Vlogmas? I'm hoping for some racy, skanky vlogs on the last day of Vlogmas, people. I'm delighted to tell you, you'll notice the backdrop, I'm in the bedroom. I have finally figured out a solution to my stupid problem about what I can clamp my new mic to in the bedroom, because nothing is really sturdy enough. So it's long been kind of brewing in the back of my mind that there's one piece of furniture that I hadn't tried, and that is, it's kind of like a TV tray. Do people even know what that is anymore? That I was using as a computer table when I had my computer back where my bookshelves are, in that cavernous space at the near the entrance of our apartment. And it's been sitting there just collecting piles of dusty paper ever since I moved the computer into the living room and got an actual desk a couple years ago. And I thought, well, maybe it would be sturdy enough that even if there's nothing on it, it would hold the mic. And it worked like a charm. I won't show you a photo of it because I didn't take the time to dust it off or wash off the 7-year-old coffee stain and whatnot. But I am here, and it's a collapsible TV tray that I can just put in the corner, and I can pull it up and get set up in a couple minutes. And I've actually got my tripod shrunk down to its smallest size and sitting on the table. And so here we go. I am so pleased with myself, because that means that I don't have to unplug the mic from at the bottom and then try to get it back in the dark where I can't see. Like, all of that is no longer an issue. So I persevered until I figured it out for myself. I'm a little slow on the uptake, but I get there eventually on some things. I have a story for you. It's not really even a story. It's a story about stories, about storytelling, story reading. I have something quite wonderful to share with you, which is the part that isn't wonderful, is that poor Lindy, who you're going to see in my weekly wrap-up, what do I call it? The highlights, here coming up here in a minute. She banged her head and is recovering from a concussion and a broken wrist. And she still managed to do a video about 10 days ago that I finally put up the other day. But she is, because of recovering from a concussion, if any of you know anything about concussions, everything I've learned about concussions, I've learned from Lindy. You can't read. Well, she can't. I don't think any of us could read while we're recovering from a concussion. So Lindy being unable to read is like the rest of us not being able to breathe. So she's doing the Christmas Advent short story calendar, and Lori is reading those to her on it every day. And I am reading other stuff to her every day and have been doing so for about a week. And I'm having such a good time. I mean, I've got the time. I'm off work, basically. A little bit of work between now and January 10th, but maybe 2 hours worth of work. So I'm basically off with no schedule, nothing to do except read. And so I am reading. The format that we've just kind of developed, it's just kind of evolved, is that every day, and this is just from my library, including my Kindle library, but, ebook library and physical library, I am pulling a book off the shelf and reading her a short story. And then I'm pulling a novel off the shelf, ebook shelf or whatever, and reading her the opening chapter or first 10 pages or whatever. And I'm doing it blind, so she doesn't know who the author or what the title is, although we've now agreed that she'd like to have the title of the short story, but not, she's quite perfectly happy to wait until the end of the story to get the author. But she does ruminate quite a bit on the title of a short story, more than she does of a novel when she's reading a short story. So yeah, that's the system we've got. And I'm having such a good time. I mean, and yes, I'm a nice person. I'm doing this for my friend who's having, going through a tough time. But it has been just absolutely delightful for me, because I'm getting to sample all these unread books all around me or inside this iPad. And I'm developing a mental TBR of what I'm going to tackle next year because, oh, that one was pretty good. Oh, I want to see what happens next. So I'm loving it. I hope Lindy makes a full recovery as soon as possible, but yet I hope that I can still read to her until I go back to work on January 12th or whenever that is. So that has been a lovely experience, and Lindy and I were already very close friends, but it's a kind of a bonding experience too, and sharing our impressions of the stories and whatnot. So I probably will do some kind of a video about it, maybe with her on Zoom, or maybe just myself wrapping up some of because it's ultimately a days-long try a chapter or something tag kind of experience. So, and here is the week in review. This Sidney Poitier, I think he mustn't be very well because he hasn't made. I'm not aware of any public appearances in about 10 years. He's 94.
His birthday's the day before mine.
You're a February 21st baby?
That's me, same as Nina Simone.
Oh, geez. Nina and Sydney and now.
Yeah, cool time of year to be born.
Wow. Mississippi, goddamn. I can't help but be intellectually curious about, well, abortion is perfectly legal and easy, not difficult to get in Canada. Why does this tradition continue? And that is one of the questions that you will have as you read the novel. But even more than that, what I loved about this novel was the characters, but in fact the two main characters I didn't really like. I was absolutely gobsmackingly fascinated by them.
I recommend that one too.
South American author in translation.
So the one that sticks out most for me is The Adventures of China Iran, and that one is this wild Argentinian adventure, historical fiction.
It's a romance, so I don't know why I have this. Young homosexual love is crystallized in facets of the first water and set in narratives that glimmer like platinum. And then it's described, his sorrows are described as young Wertherian sorrows. I don't think so. Cousin, I wish I could give this to you. I don't know why I have it, but I think it was a cover buy. What do you think? See, I'm far enough. Your task, should you choose to accept it, is to convince me that I need to give this one a try, because it does sound really fascinating.
Oh, I will give it my best shot, and especially because I think this book, it's shown up on some of the reviews of books to look for this fall, but it has not been getting the press that a lot of other titles are. And it deserves much, much more coverage and much more praise than it's getting.
I've had a good reading week, and I have things to say about my reading life, certainly my reading life for the last week of this year, but stay tuned for that. I have one bale to tell you about. And this was a surprise in that it has some of the most gorgeous prose I've read all year, but I really didn't like the novel, I decided, and that is Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday. It has some of the most gorgeous nature writing that I've read, and I've read a lot of gorgeous nature writing this year, and this probably tops the list, but he's a very cold writer. I didn't get inside any of the characters, and I read almost half. I read 40%, and I hadn't felt my way inside, hadn't made a connection with, didn't really care about any of the characters. He really made me care about the eagles, and the portraits of Pueblo life were fascinating, but I just didn't, the story didn't grab me. And I read Courtney Ferreter's review on Goodreads, and she had a kind of a similar reaction, but of course she finished it, because, Professor Ferreter. But I was disappointed, but I just thought, I can't. I'm not interested. I could have read it just for the nature writing, and maybe that's my loss, but yeah, it was not my kind of novel at all. If you can deal with characters that you feel completely distant from and love nature writing, I still recommend it, but it wasn't for me. I need to care about the people in the story, not just the eagles. And I have finished 3. I finished my 2-month-long buddy read with Jay Shea of this work of historical essays about British Columbia on the cusp of contact, gender, space, and race in the colonization of British Columbia. Essays by Jean Barman. And this was a 5-star read for me. I did have some quibbles about her writing style or whatever, but just incredibly informative. And I'm just really team Jean Barman. If you want to learn an anti-colonialist, pro-Indigenous history of Canada, but especially British Columbia, where she is based. I think she's retired now. Read Jean Barman. She is a settler historian, and she is one of the few settler historians that the Indigenous historians really respect, and I can see why, having read this book. So I found some of them a little bit dry, and she goes really into kind of genealogical detail about some of the people she's writing about, and my eyes did glaze over at some of that level of detail. But the main headings are Making White Space, and then Indigenous Women, and then Finding Solace in Family and Place, and finally Navigating Schooling. And she's not solely concerned with Indigenous history, but certainly that is a central concern. But she also talks about Chinese Canadians, Hawaiian settlers in British Columbia, and how white people treated them all like garbage and caused all kinds of problems. So it was right up my alley. If you're not particularly interested in British Columbia, you might want to try other books by her, but certainly I learned a lot. And what I appreciated was some of the nuanced insight she had about how there was actually smaller communities where it was possible for mixed race people and mixed race couples in the 19th century in British Columbia to be accepted in small communities until those small communities got connected with the wider racist as fuck British colonial society, and then everything started changing, and there's just heartbreaking stories. She makes you feel emotional about people that lived hard lives 150 or more years ago, and that is quite an achievement. It's not written in a abstruse academic style. Sometimes the prose was a little bit clunky, and she was using terms that weren't jargony, but just didn't roll trippingly off the tongue, and that's a very minor criticism because this was a very informative and enjoyable read. And I finished the novel for Indigathon, The Seedkeeper by Diane Wilson, and that was also the November pick for the Book Naturalist Club. So I'm late finishing it. I found that it was a bit too long. I didn't think that it had sufficient character development, but it had such a powerful emotional conclusion to the novel that all of those not minor concerns fell by the wayside, and it was still a 5-star read for me. I haven't watched, I think Heidi did a full review. I meant to watch it before I talked about it here. I don't think I will do a full review, because I think it's been reviewed a lot in the past month because of Heidi and Doris's Book Naturalist Club, but it's not a powerful novel, but it's an incredibly powerful story. And she gets out of her own way enough to tell it so that that power comes through, in spite of the fact that I didn't think very many of the characters jumped off the page, and I thought it was too long, and it was a little bit info-dumpy in places. So it's about, if you don't know, it's set in America, and the protagonist is a Dakota woman in fairly contemporary America, Rosalie Ironwing. And I can't remember which state it is because I'm not American and I have no concept of states, but it might be Wisconsin or something. But it goes way back in her family to the Dakota people in the 19th century, and they were the victims of horrific... I mean, I no longer think of Abraham Lincoln as a hero because he approved the execution of, was it 38 Dakota warriors? The largest mass execution in America. Has it been superseded since? I don't think so. He did whittle that down from about a list of 200 recommended people that were recommended for execution, but still, he was a bad man. It really was a beautiful, heartrending story. If you're interested in Indigenous literature, this is a book that I do heartfully recommend. I had some problems with it technically that ended up not mattering very much by the time I got to the end. I loved it. If I am right that Heidi has done a full review, I will link it in the show notes as well. But that one had me all verklempt by the end. What worked powerfully was this image of gardening and seeds, and what seeds and keeping seeds meant historically for the Dakota people, and all down through the generations into Rosalie's life, who taught herself how to garden when she was in her 20s. I mean, it would have been so easy for that metaphor to become cumbersome, and for me, I don't deal well when authors beat me over the head with metaphors, but this was insinuated through the whole story. I didn't even think of it as metaphor. It was just life pulsing through the story in all of the ways that keeping seeds and growing gardens help these people survive. It was beautiful on that level. Oh my God. And finally, I have finished, and I admit to scanning it to get finished by yesterday because I just couldn't let it drag on anymore, and I quite enjoyed it. Roughing It in the Bush by Susanna Moodie. I gave it 4 stars. And it's because she is such a good writer and such a marvelous storyteller that despite the obvious political racist problems with the book, and this is an exception that I don't always grant white authors, but I really thought it was a marvelous book. That it was 640 pages in print. I read it on ebook, and it was too long, but gorgeously written. So it is her memoir of settling, coming out from England in the 1830s with her husband, and I believe that she got on the ship pregnant and gave birth on the ship, and then raising her family in the bush of Ontario around the Peterborough area. And I was interested to finally try it because all my life I've been hearing about Susanna Moodie and Roughing It in the Bush, and I just the mere mention of the title made me fall asleep. And in fact, it was not boring. There were some boring parts, but 85% of it was absolutely gripping because she tells, I don't think she ever wrote novels, and I wish she had, but this read like a novel in many places because she's that good of a writer and storyteller and character builder. And she was such a snob, but yet I could see more than that to her. I am a white settler, and I am developing an anti-colonialist consciousness, but my consciousness is still split down the middle. And I could, in the one chapter that she devotes to the Anishinaabe people living in her midst, there was such racist stereotypes and horrific generalizations about them, but there is also, and I am not trying to convince anybody, and I would never ever debate an Indigenous reader on these points, but that she also, for her day, was quite enlightened about racism. She had been an anti-slavery. She'd been part of the anti-slavery movement in England before she'd come over, and had arguments with her neighbors about black people, but still just horrific. The N-word is not, I think she didn't think, nobody thought, maybe no white people thought in those days that the N-word was horrific, but so there's lots of that. But specifically the chapter about the Anishinaabe people, that is, she does portray them and gives them quite a bit of dignity alongside her horrific racism, and I felt them live and breathe on the page. So even in spite of her colonialist racist inheritance, I still think it's a valuable document, even for its representation of Indigenous people. But no, of course, Leanne Betasamasake Simpson hates this book. Why wouldn't she? And I wish that I could say that I hated it. I hated the racism in it, and I still am glad that I read it. So that's the split in my psyche, and I don't think I need to apologize to anybody for it, but it was actually quite a marvelous read with some really horrible racist bullshit woven throughout. So if you didn't know, Nupaming, the subtitle of Leanne Betasamasake's book, Nupaming, is The Cure for White Ladies, and it is written as a response specifically to Roughing It in the Bush. But now I realize it's actually, there's I didn't see any intertextual. It's not a retelling of that story, not at all, but it is an answering back in the form of a absolutely gorgeous and puzzling work of experimental literary fiction. An answering back to the racist bullshit in this book. And I think they do make a good pairing, but in fact, I didn't see any obvious. Simpson was referring to this. I didn't have any of those moments and have since read some of Leanne Simpson's other commentary on this book, and I don't think that it's that close of a textual connection between the two. If you know more and I missed a bunch of stuff, it happens quite often. Please leave a comment. So, I have bailed on books that had similar levels of racist garbage in them, and I didn't on this one. I was carried along by the writing and the fact that this was written in, well, I think it was published about 1850, but it was describing experiences from the 1830s in what was then called, I guess was it Upper Canada? I can't remember when Upper Canada became a political entity, but lots of rich observations about Americans, loyalists, and really snobbish observations coming from the perspective of a upper middle class British woman, English woman. Really derogatory observations about the Irish Canadians that she encountered, or the Irish immigrants that she encountered as well. I mean, she was such a snob, and I liked her. So that's quite a feat to pull that off. I'm intrigued by Susanna Moodie for the first time in my life, having read her most famous book. She came from an extremely literary family. One of her sisters was Catherine Parr Traill, who was another pioneer Canadian writer. And I can't remember, I think there were 4 sisters, all of whom had a literary career. So I don't recommend it unless you want to read it for its racism or for its gorgeous prose. But I am glad that I read it, actually. So those are what I finished. So now it is time for me to tell you how I'm planning to finish my reading year. I really had quite a slog. I mean, I'm doing this reading for Lindy, which has been so pleasant. But otherwise, I felt like I was back in undergrad school where I had to read 3 600-page novels every week to keep up with my reading. And that's what the last week has felt like. And I don't want to do that this week. So here's what I've decided. I'm going to put 2 of my current reads that I've been reading for much of 2021 into that very convenient on hold folder in Goodreads, and forget about them for a few months and pull them back out. And I'm going to finish everything else that's on my TBR, and it's kind of like Enron-esque management of my current reading folder, but, it doesn't have any ethical connotations because it's not a corporate accounting. It's Sean, the book maniac, arriving at a zero balance current reads by New Year's Day, and I don't want to slog through books that I'm otherwise enjoying. In fact, wait a minute, I'm putting 3 of my tomes on hold and finishing everything else. So here's one that I'm going to put on the on hold folder. The Palestinian novel Gate to the Sun by Elias Khoury, translated by Humphrey Davies, who just died a week or 2 ago. And I am so enjoying it. I haven't picked it up in about a month, but this is the one where I'm trying an experiment of detailed note-keeping under each character's name because there's thousands of characters in this book. It's slowing the reading process down, but it's also deepening that process. I'm having such a profound reading experience with this book, and because I have such extensive notes, I've read 70 pages, and I think my notes might be 70 pages, but it'll be easy to put it away and pull it up because I got all these notes to refresh my memory and stuff. So I'm not going to look at this again until maybe March or something like that. I'm not going to make a plan so far in advance, but I'm dying to finish it. Not this week. Not, 450 pages left to read this week. No, not going to happen. And very similarly, this Paraguayan novel, I the Supreme, by Augusto Roa Bastos. which I was loving, but I've only read 10% of it and hadn't picked it up in a month. And I just, no, 400 more pages, 350 more pages to read. Again, I just don't feel like doing that this week. And I don't want this hanging around on New Year's Day. So it's also going to go into the on hold folder. And I realize that with this one in particular, I will probably start at the beginning and carry on. But it was a very rich, enjoyable, headache-inducing in the best possible way kind of a read that I look forward to picking up, but I often bite off more than I can chew, and this is my way of dealing with that at the end of the year. So this one's going on hold. And I think I started it in January, and my iPod, my old iPad that only works when I have it plugged into the charger, is frozen up somehow, so I can't access it, so I'm going to have to do the rest from memory. But I've been reading since early in the year, volume 1 of the abridged diaries of, now I'm so flustered I can't remember its name, but it's a hyphenated surname, James something Milne. James, this is embarrassing. But anyway, here I am with no shame. Here's the cover gif. And this is volume 1 of the abridged memoirs, and it's maybe 1,000 pages from 1941 to 54 or something. And I read it every day for most of this week, and I only got about 3 or 4% further into it because it's so fascinating, and I'm Google reading it in so much granular detail that it's going to take me probably another 2 years to finish volume 1, and I'm loving it, so I don't care. I'm going to put it away for a few months. I wouldn't, even if I read nothing else for the next 7 days, I wouldn't finish this volume 1 of the diary because it's just there's so much gay gossip from the 1940s in it. I mean, it's not in the diary because he was not out on the page. He was a little bit out on the page, but not much. But then you Google the names and find out all the backstory. Oh my God, I love it so much. He was the one that, from a very early age, was hired by the British Trust, the British National Trust, that I don't understand the mechanics of it, but they'd buy estates from poor noblemen and put them in the public property, open to the public and stuff. And so he was always meeting with these old lords and ladies and stuff, and they're so eccentric, and he has such a vivid way of describing them, and that part is also a joy to read. But he's often sleeping with their nephew at the same time, but he doesn't say that in anything, but the footnotes do. It's just really a delightful read. I don't care if it takes me 5 years to finish volume 1. I love it. I'm going to read it my way. James Lees-Milne, for God's sakes, James Lees-Milne. So those 3 going on hold as of today. So that means I have 2 left here to finish up. One is volume 2 of the Clarissa audiobook. Volume 2 is 34 hours. Each of the 3 volumes are 34 hours on audio. The 1748 novel by Samuel Richardson. I'm loving it. I'm now listening to it every time I leave the house. I will easily finish it up, even though I'm only at 40%. I have 60% left to listen to, but that will be a delight to just immerse myself in the last huge chunk of it. Next Friday, New Year's Eve. And this week I thought I would finish, and I didn't because I got so deeply reconnected to it, giving it sustained attention this week, that I'm not going to rush it, but I will finish for next week, and that is my reread of The Yield by Tara June Winch. I love it again so much. I'm worried that I've fallen so deep into it emotionally again that I'm still going to have nothing to say because I'm going to be left mute by my reread, but I'm loving rereading it. So those 2 are the ones I'm committed to finishing in the next 7 days, and I have now cleared enough space that I'm going to pick up at least 2 smaller books because I don't like reading the same books, a small number of books. I need to have variety in my reading life. I have for years. It's not going to change. So I'm adding 2 to my TBR that I will start and finish in the next week. One is one of the ones that was on last night's episode of Bite Size Book Chats. I'm reading more Irish Christmas fiction, the novella that Mikiko talked about in last night's episode, and everybody is raving about. Eric Carl Anderson just posted a review literally at the same minute. I think that at the same time that my Bite Size Book Chats was going up last night, Eric Carl Anderson published his review of this. My iPad, even plugged into the charger, is not cooperating with me. And no, Fraser, I haven't gotten a new replacement battery, but I Probably should do that over the holidays while I've got time and, a little bit of Christmas money to spend. I guess it would be worth it because this is almost useless to me. So I just had to go out into the living room and look up the title and author on my computer. It's the novella that just was published October or November. Small Things Like These by Keegan. And I've just hearing wonderful reviews of it. I didn't get along with her short story in the Faber series of individually bound short stories. I really hated that story, but I have high hopes for this, my second Irish Christmas-themed fiction of 2021. Wish me luck. And another shorty that I think will be a lovely way to finish off the year is this literary essay, Gallery of Clouds by Rachel Eisendrath. This is the one that Trevor of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast and website has praised many times on his website and podcast, and he was a guest on my Bite-Sized Book Chats to sing its praises there as well. I bought it after I heard him talk about it first in his podcast episode, and boy, it sounds wonderful. It is a literary essay about the act of reading, but it's filtered through her reading Sir Philip Sidney's 16th century pastoral romance in verse, I believe, Arcadia. And you don't have to be into Sir Philip Sidney, thank God. I don't think you have to be into poetry to sink into this meditation on why we read and how we read. And it's gorgeously written with illustrations and kind of little sections that have a standalone vitality, I'm pretty sure. So this will be a marvelous way. Without footnotes, it is 135 pages. So I will be starting this. I may start other stuff this week too, if things go well, but that's enough of a taste of what the last reading week of 2021 will be for me. And I will be putting up my last Friday reads on the last day of the year. Enjoy your holidays, and if you're into that sort of thing, Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you again soon.